Are we ever going to have a chat about how big those things are getting?
Nope. Greetings, Catachan kill knives, and welcome to Codex Compliant.
Don your bandanas and set your booby traps. We're covering Codex Catachans.
Catachan is the most infamous death world in the galaxy, and its inhabitants are the deadliest breed of jungle fighters serving the Emperor. To do battle with the warriors of Catachan is to fight the very forces of nature itself.
Codex Catachans was released in the year 2000 for 40k's 3rd edition. It was a supplement to 3rd edition's Imperial Guard Codex, and by that we mean the first 3rd edition Imperial Guard Codex, since there was 2 of them. After all, multiple versions of a codex in quick succession is not entirely a modern day 40k thing. It's also the only physical codex the Catachans have had up to this point, with their only other codex being a PDF in 4th edition, although they were on the cover of the 2nd edition Guard Codex. And yes, we're going to be pronouncing it Catachan throughout this video. We're aware that there's some debate about how you're supposed to pronounce it, but it's not a real place, so it doesn't matter. You can pronounce it Catachan or Catachan, whatever, it's fine.
Although I do want you to know that we did strongly consider changing the way we pronounce the word Catachan every single time we said it in this video so we could annoy the maximum amount of people, but decided against it, so you're welcome.
Also, a big thank you to Crimson J, who kindly sent this codex in to us. So, what is a Catachan? Who needs them? Who wants them? Who's got them? Well, Catachan is a death world, and by that we mean a planet that is considered too dangerous for widespread human colonization. Though small pockets of it are inhabited, most of the planet is one huge jungle, full of wildly dangerous animals and plants. And I'm not sure, but I suspect some of the rocks might be bad news too. Living in such an environment has made the people of Catachan incredibly hardy, and so their Imperial Guard regiments are well known for being tough and being able to deal with the toughest of terrain. To quote Captain Rock of the Catachan III talking about Varestus Prime,
"We've run into scorpions the size of battle tanks. 3 men died from eye rot last week. I've sweat enough to fill a lake. My boots got stuck into a sink swamp, and the trees are so thick in places you can't even squeeze between them. Emperor help me. I love this place. It's just like home."
which goes some way to explaining how they managed to get a 5+ armor save out of a thin tank top. They're just like that. Although they're perhaps not as tough as the Woad warriors of Tangar, who managed to get that armor save wearing, well, nothing. Just letting it all hang out there, I guess.
On the lore front, there's some fun fluff in here. For example, it reveals that certain Deathworld regiments are known to steal Ogryns from other regiments, something the Ogryns don't really mind since the 2 groups tend to get on famously well. There's a little bit about the Catachan swamp rats who covered themselves in Tyrannid gunk to build up an immunity to their toxins and mask their smell. After successfully wiping out the Tyrannid swarm, they then had to spend 2 years in quarantine. Which is a mood. There's a beginner's guide to the art of laying traps, mines, and other unpleasant surprises, an in-universe guide to booby traps, and despite it containing info on things like the Necromundan Cyclops anti-armor blast sphere, and the Devil's Maw, the thing that feels the most grim in here is the toe popper, where you bury a bolt round with a nail or something underneath so it goes off when someone treads on it, although given how powerful bolt rounds are, that'd probably take off a bit more than your toes. Another part of note shows a document believed to be written by Offworlder Willimus Scaraphus Don Blair, who claimed to be a great hunter and wanted to hunt a Catachan devil in its native environment, with a small army and whatever local Catachan bush crazies were willing to show him the way. It does not seem to go too well for them. And if you've ever wondered about the various knives of Catachan, well, this book has you covered, showing you a handful of different knife variants, and letting us know that there's a booming trade of fake Catachan knives sold by unscrupulous rogue traders. You see, Catachan knives are a little like champagne. You can call it one, but if it's not from Catachan itself, then it's really more of a sparkling dagger.
To begrudgingly acknowledge the actual rules in this rulebook for a second, Codex Catachans gave you the ability to field not only a Catachan army, but to field a generic Deathworld veteran army, as well as rules for jungle fighting. There were a few ways to field a Catachan army. The first was to simply run a regular Imperial Guard army, but with Catachan models. Basically how people had to do it before this book came out. The second was to do that, but include some of the special units from in this book, but otherwise run it as normal. And the third was to run a Deathworld veteran army, which was very limited in what it could take, but benefited from several interesting special rules. A Deathworld veteran army was, outside of Sentinels, entirely devoid of vehicles, and most units benefit from the Deathworld veteran special rule. This allowed them to infiltrate, have an increased cover save when in wooded or jungle terrain, and allowed them to move and shoot through it easier as well. You could also give this rule to units if you're running a regular guard army at 3 points a model, but those points are already factored into the price of the units in this list.
The Deathworld Veteran Army list is as follows. For HQ choices, you had Deathworld Veteran Command HQ squads, which was a stripped-down version of the ones from the regular Guard Codex of the time, and Commissars. For elites, you had Catachan Devil squads, a super customizable squad with kill knives, who were even more veteran than the other veterans in this veteran army, and were named after this abomination. Also for elites you could take assault squads and veteran snipers. For troops there was Ogryns and infantry platoons. Platoons were an interesting thing back then actually. They were basically a mini force in their own right containing many units that could move independently. They had a commander, 2 to 5 squads of guardsmen, and maybe a heavy weapons squad. So this means that your mandatory 2 troops choice could actually be 10 squads of guardsmen. That's up to 100 models, and that's not counting commanders or heavy weapons squads. Fast attack was filled in by sentinels and veteran patrols, and heavy support was just mortar heavy weapon squads and booby traps. We'll talk about those later. Oh, and this hasn't got anything to do with the army list, but there's this little goblin of a man poking out the margin on page 5, and he's the best. He's literally my Twitter profile image right now. I love him that much.
Special rules of note are that Deathworld veteran snipers couldn't move at all, but could disappear back into the jungle, removing them from play but not counting as a kill for victory point purposes. Sentinels had the rule Chainsaw Warriors, which gave them an extra attack, but mostly served as a cute little reference to the 1987 GW game of the same name. And Commissars had Oops Sorry Sir, a rule representing the fact that soldiers from places like Catachan tended to resent strangers telling them what to do or threatening their friends. And so at the start of the game you roll a d6 for each Commissar, and on the roll of a 1 they'd have a little accident before the battle and you wouldn't be able to use them. This book also has the Codex debuts of the special characters Colonel Ironhand Strachan and Sly Marbo. It's easy to forget, given the memification of Marbo, that his introductory lore was a little bit more grounded and much more, well, sad.
The Colonel stepped up to Trooper Marbo. Marbo's eyes were empty again, like they always were when he wasn't stalking through the jungle or carving his name in some enemy's internal organs. Inwardly, the Colonel sighed. There was something wrong with this boy. Blood and death had warped him to the point where he could only be normal with a blade in his hand.
Which makes all the more sense given how transparently he's based on John Rambo.
The colour section of the Codex is mostly given over to show you how to paint and model your Deathworld veterans, as well as creating suitable boards for them to fight on. Old school GW fans will be pleased to know that the classic weird alien cactus does make an appearance. Praise be to the weird alien cactus. You also, amongst some others, get to see some of Andy Chambers and Gav Thorpe's Catachan conversions, since they, along with Jervis Johnson, wrote this book, showing off the flexibility of the then new plastic Catachan models that were only replaced in... nope, they're still selling them. They remind me of those 90s Star Wars toys where everyone is unreasonably muscular for no reason. Although the best conversion in here has to be this guardsman cosplaying as a tree to moderate success. The showcase also has a Catachan Rough Rider made from an old Dark Elf Cold One, which is pretty neat, although I'll admit that I find it a little difficult to concentrate on him since this guardsman's earless torment haunts my dreams and I can't look away from him.
Towards the back of the book, there's a few interesting bits and pieces. First, there's rules for setting up and fighting in dense jungle terrain. If you use these rules, you would cover more of the table in terrain than you usually would. Between 50 to 90% of the table is suggested. There's even a handy generator. It also had specific rules for things like seeing through dense foliage, moving vehicles through said foliage, and getting spooked. Basically, if you rolled a double 1 on a difficult terrain test going through the jungle, the squad would get spooked. Meaning that they would think that they've seen something in the jungle and shoot wildly into it, a la Predator, or alternatively, they'd run into something like a carnivorous plant or particularly malicious rock. Either way, the unit would be unable to move, shoot, or assault for that turn. There's also ambushes. Certain units from this book can be set up to ambush your opponent rather than be deployed normally. To do this, you divide the board up into a grid of 1-foot squares and mark down where the units are hiding. This is hidden from your opponent, and the squads could be revealed at the start of one of your turns. However, an enemy unit with an Auspex or a faction equivalent could scan at the start of their shooting phase and force you to reveal any squad in that square before you're ready. And speaking of dividing up the board into a grid, well, those booby traps you bought as a heavy support choice from earlier also involve that. You secretly place the traps in a square, again hiding it from your opponent. Whilst in a booby trap square, if they roll a double 1 during difficult terrain tests, falling back or pursuing, the booby trap goes off. Why yes, that does mean you could get booby trapped and spooked at the same time. How fun. Although just like ambushes, they can be detected using an Auspex. You can't actually disarm them or anything, but at least you get to know that they're there.
And that was Codex Catachans. Of the Codex supplements from 3rd edition, we think this remains one of the more interesting ones to read nowadays, possibly since this is the only time they had their own physical codex, so it's a little unique. Although of course by design you wouldn't have really gotten the best out of a pure Deathworld veterans Catachan army, unless you only use them with all the jungle rules and on a board covered in aquarium foliage and an appropriate amount of weird alien cactuses.
And speaking as an Australian, I have seen the photoshopped Codex Catachans that says Codex Australians, and I've seen it. It's really sweet and beautiful that you think of me, but I've seen it. I have seen it more times than I have seen the sun.
Yeah, but have you seen the photoshopped Tyranid Codex that's Australian wildlife?
Why do people live here?